Hey, Joey, my stream's up. Good afternoon. I'm Tracy Sinclair, and we are getting ready to head live downtown to downtown Anchorage to the Atwood building, where Governor Mike Dunleavy is holding a press conference talking about education legislation as well as legislation dealing with impeding public access.
Talk about what we refer to as an impediment bill, and we'll start with that first. And I'll talk a little bit about that, then I'll go into education, and then we'll have a lot of time for questions. Okay. So the impediment bill, the reason behind the impediment bill is, if you are watching any social media, any news, you're seeing more and more individuals and groups pressing their case, their opinions, their politics in the public sphere. Now, remember, the First Amendment guarantees the right, amongst many other things, to assemble freely and to petition your government, and also free association. But it also talks about how you can do just about anything you want on private property, but when you're in the public sphere, it's a little different. So what we're finding is, after watching over the past couple years, when people glue themselves to highways, chain themselves to entry or exit ways to impede passage, whether it's a vehicle, whether it's individuals walking, et cetera, what we're finding in places such as Great Britain and other places across the world, not only is the public opinion changing on that radically, but what's happening is people are being harmed. They're not getting the work on time. In some cases, there's medical issues in which the impediment is causing some serious problems. And so when you look at Alaska, and we have basically 2 or 3 major roads, and imagine for a moment a group of folks that want to press their case. They want the world to know, they want Alaskans to know that maybe they're protesting on behalf of all of this disenfranchised tall people in Alaska. So they decide to chain themselves across the highway. And 25 cars back is an individual that has an asthmatic child, and they were planning to get to the hospital. Now, some of these people that will chain themselves, and their motherships that actually put them up to this, will say, well, Dunleavy, anything could happen on a highway. You could have a moose crash, an accident. Yeah, you can. And you can have acts of nature. But when people do things like this, they have to calculate it. And if they haven't already, I'm sure they are now, they have to calculate the risk that they impose on the public that really does not want to participate in their actions. That the risk for a medical emergency, an emergency responder situation, an individual that has to be somewhere on time, or they are impacted financially, their career, et cetera, most, I think, reasonable people believe that's not right. So people are going to say, well, is it a big problem here in Alaska? No, thank goodness it's not, but we don't want it to be. So with the passage of this bill, what will happen is individuals may incur greater criminal charges depending upon what occurs. Individuals may end up paying civil damages as well. And what we refer to as the mothership, the organization that may have put up individuals to do this, would also be financially liable if, in the event there's an injury, a death, or some loss of income or other loss financially. And so we actually think it's a concept that needs to happen. And I'm sure I've seen some stuff from the ACLU that says this is a terrible thing. it's not a terrible thing to make sure you can get from one place to another. One of the hallmarks of being an American, one of the hallmarks of America is free passage. The ability to go from one place to another in the public sphere, in this great country, in this great state of Alaska as well. And so we are, in fact, we've introduced this bill, and we hope it moves. But again, like I said last time when we talked about education, watch closely the groups that want to stop this. See what their associations are. I can guarantee you're going to have very few individuals that traverse the highways every day saying, yeah, I kind of think this is a great idea that people should chain themselves across the highway when I have to get to work. Or, yeah, I think it's a great idea. I'm a police officer or an emergency responder. Now, somebody will say, well, if they're a police officer or emergency responder, they just put their sirens on. Not necessarily if you're 40 cars back and people are glued to a highway. Then you have to make a decision whether you're going to put your sirens on and run them over, or you're going to put your sirens on and try and pry them off the road. Well, by that time, something tragic could have happened on the road. So we believe that people have the absolute right to express and protest and petition their government. Absolutely. And we believe they have the absolute right to do this, certainly in private property, but in the public sphere as well. They don't have the right to damage other people in their pursuit of free speech. They don't have the right to do that. And hopefully, with the passage of this bill, we'll have stiffer penalties and make sure that Alaska is a safer place. Still one of the freest places there is, by far, but a safe place for individuals. So that's the purpose of the bill. And we'll take questions after I go through the education part here. So the House passed 140, which is a bit of an omnibus education bill, and then the Senate passed it yesterday. We took a look at the bill, and we think it comes up short. We've said that. It certainly addresses the desire on the part of the educational establishment for more spending, more money. But it does fall short of expanding our ability to increase our charter schools. It does absolutely nothing, zero, for recruitment and retention of teachers. And that's a fascinating, that whole thing is a fascinating journey for myself, being an educator, being a teacher, principal, superintendent. I've told you guys this 100 times. But when I came up here in the 80s, we had recruitment and retention problems back then. Because, due in part, Alaska's remoteness, especially some of our rural communities. And so there's been extensive studies, extensive discussions, extensive work on this issue. And I'm going to actually use as a guide, and I don't want anyone toppling over here, but I'm going to use I think it was a February 10th editorial by the ADN. Now, there's no doubt that the ADN and I don't always agree, but this editorial was handed to me one day. I have to tell you, I almost took a stroke. And I'll explain why, and you'll see why. So right out of the gate, this editorial is titled, "Stakes Are High for Alaska, Educating Funding Efforts." If there's one thing, and this is a quote, this is how we highlighted this because I had to read it 3 or 4 times. If there's one thing that really all Alaskan legislators and Governor Mike Dunleavy can agree on this legislative session is that Alaska's public education system needs attention. Now, to the credit of the editorial board, they just didn't say funding. That's part of it, and we'll talk about that. But they said it needs attention. Why does it need attention? Because it's performing well? Because we're one of in the top quartile, in the top 10% in the nation in terms of performance by anyone's measure? We all know the answer to that is no. And 6 years, going on 6 years being a governor in the state of Alaska, you get to learn a lot. And one thing I've learned is that this state has tremendous potential, resource-wise, location, and tremendous potential in our educational system. And how do I know that? Well, the resources speak for themselves, and the location speaks for itself. But as a result of really one of the only studies examining performance of charter schools across this country, Alaska is number 1. I had to read that 3 times. I had a conversation with one of the researchers that came up and testified down in Juneau. And applying the scientific method, which they did, Alaska's charter schools, performance-wise, using the NAEP tests, was number one. Now, you would tend to think there'd be a chatter, just a number of folks and special interests and others saying, well, if that's working, we've got to expand that. Not really. Not really. The most important thing for people, special interests, was not to build upon something that is succeeding beyond anyone's wildest dreams, and that's not an exaggeration. Succeeding beyond anyone's wildest dreams. The attempts to expand that were met with, at best, resignation, and at worst, undermining efforts to do that. That's why in the bill that came out, you'll see it's not as robust as really it should be in order to expand our charter schools. We have wait lists in Alaska. A lot of states have wait lists, but we have wait lists here in the state of Alaska. So parents and children want to attend these schools that coalesce around a mission. And again, as an educator, for years, I've always been trying to figure out what are ways to keep parents engaged, what are ways to keep children engaged. This is a perfect way to do that. Now, don't get me wrong, there's things in this bill that I think are good, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But it does come up short. One of the things that's not in the bill, which I just find fascinating, to me it's just, and I don't mean to be laughing, but to me it's just it's really a shock. Again, this is in the editorial, and I'm taking from the editorial. Nearly everyone agrees Alaska has a problem attracting and keeping new teachers. So everyone agrees with that, and I would agree that almost everyone that's engaged in this discussion agrees with that. 2020, we put together a study to study and ask teachers, what is it that would help make the profession better for you? You know, and I know there's people going to watch this news broadcast and say teachers have it easy. Well, if that was the case, everyone would want to be teaching. We wouldn't have a problem. So we know it's not that easy, especially this day and age with all the politics involved in it, all the expectations. It is not an easy job. If so, we wouldn't be having this discussion. If so, states across this country would not be having this discussion. So what are states across the country doing to address this? Are they following the Alaska model that just occurred 2 days ago, and that is totally ignoring teacher recruitment and attention? No. They're doing everything they can to recruit and retain because they know something that I know, but apparently some of the special interests in Alaska don't know. There's not a lot of people going into teacher education programs. There's not a lot of people staying in the profession, and we need teachers. You know, AI and technologies and that sort of thing, they're going to be able to address a lot of things that we do, but there's no substitute between the teacher and the student, and that's a fact. And so, as a result of study after study, as a result of decades of research, as a result of all of this, and finally as a result of that study in 2020, we put together something that we thought most people could get around. We certainly thought that NEA Alaska would get around it. We thought this was a no-brainer. Well, we were about to be shocked. And so, here's another quote. There is no question that constant teacher turnover or vacant positions is making it tougher for our students to succeed. I want to repeat that. There is no question that constant teacher turnover or vacant positions is making it tougher for our students to succeed. I agree. I agree. What would be the result of that, do you think, in other places? Well, I just told you. They're doing everything they can to recruit and retain teachers in a highly competitive world. Another quote from the editorial. Dunleavy has proposed, as he did last year, a bonus incentive program for teachers intended to help stem turnover, particularly in rural school districts. The turnover in our rural school districts, in some cases, is tremendous. And everyone knows that this does not bode well for outcomes in learning for kids. It just simply doesn't. So how do we fix it? We thought by coming up with a stepped incentive to recruit and retain teachers of $5,000 in your urban districts, which, by the way, a $5,000 in your pocket every year for 3 years far exceeds any, quote, raises. And I got to make clear, this is not pay, this is not a raise. This is a bonus directly from the state to measure a research model that we would put in place to see, does it really work? This amount of money really work here in Alaska? Well, as a result of what happened this week, we may never know, because that was stripped out. Apparently, and I have yet to figure this out, apparently NEA and others have other ways to put money in teachers' pockets that would come close to $5,000 for urban school districts, $10,000 per teacher, classroom teacher for rural districts, and $15,000 for those districts that are really remote and have high turnover. They apparently have some idea. And what I actually heard was that there was a celebration that the bill was passed without this in there. So for the teachers watching this right now, today, you'll see it later on, you can come to the site and watch this. The fact of the matter is there is no teacher recruitment retention bonus in this bill that I am being asked to contemplate to sign into law. Now, many of you have been fed for years since I came into office that I'm anti-teacher, which makes no sense. I was a teacher. That I'm anti-student. I've got kids. That I'm anti-public school. They all went to public school. I went to public school. My wife went to public school. That I'm anti a lot of things, but that's for another press conference. The fact of the matter is, you don't have a school. Take out teachers for a moment. Just eliminate teachers from the, you got administrators, which I was as well. They work hard as well. You got board members, which I was. You've got janitors, which there are, and they work hard. But in the classroom, you got kids sitting there, and there is no teacher. So I don't know how education happens without a teacher. And I don't know how Alaska competes without competing. We just took ourselves out of the competing game. We just said we don't care. They'll be okay. Again, I'm curious what the ideas are to stem the turnover and what the ideas are to recruit. Because up until this year, one of the things I heard over and over and over again from outfits like NEA and their acolytes is, we got to do something about teacher turnover. Well, we just tried to, and it's gone. Now, before I have to interject, this is important. I do want to thank the House for putting together an omnibus bill. I want to make clear, I do want to thank them for that. House majority put that together. And I want to make clear, that was a great move. It changed the entire conversation in Juneau. Because the first 30 days in Juneau is oftentimes the introduction of guests on the floor, special orders. History would show that not a lot of serious business takes place the first 30 days. These guys went right to it, and I want to thank them for that. Turned the whole thing upside down. And I understand why the House voted to pass this bill out, because many believed it was the best thing they could get, and I get that. But it's really one side of a coin. And what we need to work on is the other side of the coin. I'll talk about that here too. So, again, Dunleavy has proposed, as he did last year, a bonus incentive program for teachers intended to help them stem turnover, particularly in rural districts. And quote, again, from the editorial, it's not a bad idea. Again, I was surprised. There was this question, so what happens when a special interest believes that the game is not being played the way they want to? They start to throw up like a flak screen, in World War II. They start to throw up this, all these questions. Well, is it legal? It's not legal. You can't do this. That's legal. Well, it's a cash bonus. It's got to be done at the local level. No, it doesn't. The teacher retirement system is a state statute. It's done at the state level. What about the janitors? The janitors are great people. I have relatives that are janitors in the schools. they're going to be paid too. And let's think about this for a moment. There's not 20 janitors to a school and one teacher. There's usually 1 or 2 janitors in our smaller schools, and they work their tails off. There's no doubt about it. But what people fail to discuss or mention is that there was also always going to be money put into the BSA to help cover those costs. To help cover those costs. So those folks would have been taken care of in a BSA bump, no doubt about it. But it's the teachers that matter. And they're not going to see $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 in their pocket. They might not see much of anything. And I'll make a bet next year or two, there'll be knocks on the door. Hey, Dunleavy, we got to do something about teacher retention. Oh, really? Well, we should have done it this year. Quote, Dunleavy's bonus plan should be included in the final package. It wasn't. It's gone. Again, I'm talking to the teachers, I'm talking to the parents of the state of Alaska. This wasn't a game. I'm not up for re-election. This wasn't a political stunt. This was the realization that this is the opportunity to impact this issue that's bedeviled Alaska for decades, is bedeviling the lower 48 immensely. And the result of what's happening down there, this may get worse up here. So this was the answer. It's gone out of this bill. BSA increase. Great BSA increase. NEA's got money now so that it can be negotiated the way they want it to be. But what does the ADN article, or the editorial say about base student allocation? It's undeniable that the past 7 years without a BSA increase has led to substantial erosion of the real dollar funding amount because of inflation since it was last increased. Everyone agrees with that. We're all experiencing inflation. That's why we put money in the BSA. But they say one other thing. But simply rubber stamping a large BSA increase doesn't make sense. I agree again. I agree with the ADN. I'm on the record agreeing with the ADN. This is interesting. Dunleavy and like-minded legislators rightly mistrust school districts' tendency to grow administration with money that was meant for the classroom. We saw what happened in Juneau several weeks ago. Oops, we found a hole in the budget. We didn't account for $3 or $4 million. What's also not being discussed is when people say, when it's all about money, it's all you hear is BSA, money, money, money. We dress kids in red. We send people down to Juneau dressed in red. We talk about money, we talk about money, we talk about money. And that inflation's a problem, which it is. I agree 100%. But what also is not discussed is the fact that we're educating less kids. We're educating less kids. We're down at least roughly 3,000 kids in Anchorage. Okay, happens, right? The demographics, the country's changing, the world is changing, people are having less kids. You're gonna have less kids in schools. So what do you do if you have less kids in schools? Do you continue to maintain the same amount of infrastructure, the same amount of buildings, the same size? So let's say a building designed for 1,000 kids now has 600 in it. And a school across, several blocks away or across town has 600 in it, designed for 1,000. Do you continue to ask for more money to maintain a building of for 1,000 kids in which you only have 600? And that's a question for the taxpayers. Is that something they want to pay for? Maybe they do. But part of the reason is, with regard to the BSA and funding, is there's less kids in most of the state. Matsu's different, 1 or 2 other places are different, but mostly people are just having less kids. That's another reason why there's less money. We're going to get to the questions here soon, folks. How about this one? I had to sit down after this. Literally, I sat down. While a moderate BSA increase is warranted, the Dunleavy approach of weighing that support to classroom instruction is the more responsible path. In other words, the editorial board is saying the same thing we are. Just giving money with no accountability and no expectation that anything will be done different is what some of these special interests want. It kind of, I never used this term in my 6 years, seriously. But it breaks my heart to think that this is just about money. Now, they're going to scramble after this press conference. Trust me, you're probably getting tweets right now, and you're probably getting texts right now. Ask them this, ask them that. What about this? What about that? That's good. You guys can do that. That's good. But they're going to scramble to figure out some way to clean up this mess and justify this or justify that. Let's go to charter schools for a moment. Come back to them for a moment here. We just said the only research that says, Alaska's charter schools are the best in the world. I think that's unbelievable. I think that's an unbelievable recruiting tool for the state of Alaska. I think we should be trumpeting that from the highest hills. When I go see my fellow governors, I am going to talk about that. What about some in the educational establishment in Alaska? Crickets. Weird, right? Crickets? Why aren't they celebrating with us? Why am I and a bunch of parents and others, why are we the only ones doing a little dance on this thing here? Because it doesn't fit the narrative. It doesn't fit the narrative. Because if charter schools can work, then the other schools can work as well. And that's what we've always believed, but some may not believe that. They believe if you put more money in, it'll work. Just put more money in. Okay, in front of you, you got a sheet with pencils, right? The narrative has been that since Dunleavy got in office, it's been cut. The budgets have been cut. Those are facts. Those are facts. The educational, K-12 educational budget you have in front of you, the funding, doesn't show that. As a matter of fact, 2021, 22, Alaska got almost $600 million additional dollars during COVID when the kids weren't even in school. $600 million. So $600 million, no decrease, and I agree, there's inflationary issues. But can't we agree just as strongly, just as vigorously, that we must demand better opportunities for our kids, better outcomes for our kids? So what happened to the reading portion of this bill? And I'll get to that in a moment. I should do that now. The reading portion, I'm sure it was great intentions, but in essence, it underwrites an extra $500 for kids that are performing well. What about we set up a system that ensures that kids do better? And that's part of this. That's part of the bill that I think we need to have a discussion on over the next several days. And I'm going to talk about what the plan is here. I'm going to hop back to charter schools here, and I'm going to wrap this one up here in just a moment here. But it's clear that charter schools here are working well. I didn't write that. Anchorage Editorial Board did. It's clear that charter schools here are working well and deserve focus and expansion, as they're offering high-quality education and valuable options to students and parents. Just think about that for a moment. A school that you want to be part of it and you want to go have your child go there. Would they perform better? Probably. The student, this is the thing that just blows my mind more than anything. The study also noted that students from disadvantaged backgrounds, because that's the litany of excuses, the flat screen. Kids from low-income families, they don't do well in charter schools. Kids from a different ethnic background, they don't do well in charter schools. Well, the study debunked that. The study also noted that students from disadvantaged backgrounds who attend charter schools also outperform their peers at non-charter schools. This is a real problem for the educational establishment that does not want anything changed. This is a problem. I know it's a problem. They're talking about it. They're talking to my people about it. They're talking to each other. How do we deal with this? What do we do here? Well, we had a plan to deal with it. and that was to be able to expand charter schools. Now, people will say, well, local control, that's where we should go. I was a superintendent. I'll tell you a story. When the whole homeschool movement started in the 90s, led by a superintendent in Galena, and we would get together in the Alaska School Administration Association meetings, I remember going into the first time, sitting down and going, oh, this is a great idea. I wish I thought about that. And then the discussion started. And then it was about, how do we stop it? Like it was some type of contagion. How do we stop this homeschooling thing? Well, why? Why would we want to stop it? Well, they'll take kids from our schools. Wait a second. How do they take kids from your schools? If you're offering a program that kids and families want, you don't have anything to worry about. Well, that was fought. And if you don't believe me, look at the history. But thank goodness, back then, there was a legislature in the 90s that was very pro-homeschool and was able to put in legislation that got us here today. Largest school in the state, 2,400 students, Matsu K-12 Central School. Homeschools growing all over the state, all over the country. As a result of demographic shifts, families want to do something different, medical issues with their children, personal issues with their children. And I am so proud that in the state of Alaska, we have homeschools, both non-public and public. And I want to thank the legislators for voting for an increase for homeschools. I'm going to wrap this up here, and I will tell you what the plan is here going forward. Yeah, and here's one of the last paragraphs coming from the ADN editorial. You know what the problem is with this editorial? I actually might have to start to read them. It's concerning. Anyway, it's also important to finally hear from the governor on the specific priorities, as ultimately a signature will be required to pass any legislation. All right, so we have an opportunity right now before us like we've never had before. I want to thank the legislature, the House especially, and the Senate for passing what we had. It's half a coin. It's a three-legged horse, meaning it's not going to run very far, all right? But we can fix that. We have 15 days before it becomes law or before I veto. And I made it clear that if there are not certain elements in that bill, it's not going to be. I won't sign it into law. I'll veto it. Now, with that said, I would hope everyone's going to look at this as an opportunity to put some of those other things in, to beef up the reading, to expand the ability to do charter schools. There's other things that we can talk about too here with regard to, there was a transportation issue that people brought up with charter schools. How do we get our kids to charter? We can talk about that. Everything is solvable. Everything is doable. Everything can be done. There's plenty of time. These items have been vetted. The pieces and parts are there. There are bills that could be used to carry these items. It can be done if we want to. So if people really want the BSA, they're going to want to help to get these items across the finish line over the next 14 days. My people will work with them. I know that legislators want these pieces in there as well. And if we do that, this becomes not just the BSA bill, but this truly becomes an educational enhancement, reform bill, in which our kids, our families, and our teachers will benefit greatly from. So, I want to thank the House. I want to thank the Senate. Here's an opportunity to make this happen. If not, and I've said this before, I am not just going to send more spending out the window. I will not do it. I think it's the wrong thing to do. The right thing to do is let's sit down, get a couple more of these items done, and then we have two bills, two sides of a coin called educational reform, enhancement in the state of Alaska that we all can be proud of. That's where we need to go with this. So I'm going to open this up for questions, and Grant, if you're going to.
All right, thanks, Governor. First, we'll start here
just a glass of water.
With Iris Samuels with the ADN.
Thanks, Governor. I am wondering if you could talk a little bit about your position on negotiations during these next 14 days. Do you see it as possible to propose smaller bonuses for teachers or some kind of flexibility to meet the legislature halfway on that? And then more broadly, do you believe that there has to be an element related to teacher bonuses and charter schools, or would you take one or the other? And lastly, do you see a need for reducing the BSA increase for you to be able to sign off on this bill?
Well, and that's a very good question, Iris, and let's be clear. At the end of this, as we get to the end of the session, the chances are there'll be proposed spending that exceeds greatly our ability to pay for it across the board. And then you begin a winnowing process at that point. And I'm going to give as much detail to this answer as I can. What we're talking about right now is the policy. It's the values of what we want to do right now. And then the funding has got to come later. Are we going to be able to fund everything we want? I don't think so. Not with the income that we have right now, not with the revenue that we have right now. But we can talk about that as well. What gets funded? How much it gets funded? We can talk about that. I don't think there has to be an either or. I don't understand why there has to be something for charter schools, like it's and bear with me, like it's Dunleavy gets a participation trophy by getting charter schools, when we have these other things that also need to be addressed. I think it could be both. And so, in terms of negotiations, and I'm glad you said that, there's going to be people that are going to say, oh, we got to send it back to committee. Okay, some of these things have been sent through committee a couple times. We know what they do. So really, it's just sitting down and saying, all right, what can we get in these bills? Let's work together to get these things in the bills and get a package together that we can pass in 14 days. I think we can. I think we can do it.
All right, next we have Andrew Kissman with the Alaska Beacon.
Governor, in the State of the State address, you asked Alaskans to learn to say yes, and it can be difficult for the legislature to pass a policy bill like this. Do you see a contradiction between saying no to this bill if it doesn't have these other bills and what you said during the State of the State?
I don't see it as a contradiction. I don't see it as a contradiction because there's an opportunity now, I think, to get a package together. I think we got a half package. We got a half package. I mean, that would be like saying yes to a bridge, you get half a bridge. Your car's going to fall off, obviously, but I think no. I think this is the year for educational reform, to be honest with you, and we talked about that. Look, I've got other bills, educational bills in there that right now aren't moving. That's a different discussion. There are elements that have been discussed over here the last few weeks that I think we can coalesce around and get a bill put together. I think we could have two sides of this educational omnibus package put together so that both get across the finish line at the same time.
We're going to go online now. We'll start with Eric Stone with Alaska Public Media.
Hi there, Governor. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes. Yes.
My question is the retention bonuses and the charter school authorization components in particular, they didn't pass the House. There was a dramatic 2020 vote on the floor. 3 members of the majority voted against it. Representative Edmond cited those two things when he voted against the rules committee version of the bill. What do you think things will be different this time?
Well, I don't know. I mean, in some ways, I don't know what will be different this time, except they will have to decide if they want some of the work they did to get across the finish line. Because it can't just be BSA. I've said that. We've done that for years. We've done that for decades. Just talk about more money. And the discussion has to change. It's changing across the country. I mean, the things they're doing in other states would put us to shame in some respects. And some of those things, to be fair, in other states probably wouldn't get support here. But nonetheless, they're doing everything they can to be competitive. This is about being competitive. This is about making sure our kids can be competitive. This is about making sure our kids are able to read and write and do math. More and more, schools are de-emphasizing those basic skills and emphasizing other things. I think I think if we've got enough people that want to get the educational reform pieces put together, we can do it in 14 days, and we can pass both bills. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll definitely have a press conference at the end of 14 days and let you know how this went. But you know, I'm the eternal optimist. We got the tools to do it. We got the time to do it. The question is, do we have the will to do it? And really, the bigger question is, are we going to play political games with regard to performance and things like charter schools and reading? There was like 2 years ago, the Reading Act only passed by 1 vote. Some of the same games were being played back then. But with bipartisan support, myself and former Senator Begich and other senators and other House members forced that one through. And that gives us hope that we can ensure that kids are going to be reading at grade level. We'll see what happens here.
All right, next we'll go to Margie Bellman with the Cordova Times.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a question for the governor here. Thousands of students and teachers have invested in neighborhood schools over the years, Governor, where the students have gone on to some really successful careers by way of trade schools and college. I know of one student at Matsu who told her parents she wasn't going to college. She instead opted to get trained as a helicopter pilot and is very happy and successful in that field. My question to you is, the bulk of your comments today are in praise of charter schools. What do you have to say about the success of the neighborhood schools all over the state? Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Margie, we have a lot of great neighborhood schools. I never said, nor would I ever say that we don't have a lot of great neighborhood schools. But what I am saying, and by the way, Margie, I don't know if you missed it, but my 3 daughters went to public school in the Valley, graduated from public school, and they're successful now as well. And so what I'm saying is, everybody's life is a little different. And that's why having a robust public homeschool system, a robust charter school system, and a robust neighborhood school system, all public schools, I think is the ideal way to go. I don't think it should be an either or, but if we've got data that shows that our charter schools are succeeding and that we have waiting lists, why not expand that? Why not expand that opportunity? This isn't an either or. We have great neighborhood schools. We have some neighborhood schools that are performing poorly. This is why we want to help with reading. This is why we want to help with retaining teachers and recruiting teachers. So this isn't a diss on neighborhood schools. I was a superintendent of a school district that most of the schools were neighborhood schools. I was an administrator. I was a teacher. So no, I think we can have a high-performing system across the board. But why are we preventing kids from going to charter schools? Why don't we expand those charter schools? Why, when a group wants to go and get a contract with a district, if they're turned down, why can't they go to the state? Why don't we keep the? I don't think it's an either or, Margie.
All right, next we have James Brooks with the Alaska Beacon. James, are you online with us? All right, we'll move on to Haley Lehman with the Fairbanks Daily News Monitor.
Good afternoon, Governor. I was wondering, as the bill is written today, are you planning to veto this bill? And if so, what does it take for you to pass this bill, or what certain elements does this bill need to have for you to pass it?
Well, we've been talking about this probably for the past 30 minutes. We need to fix a couple things in that bill. We need to make sure that we are addressing the teacher retention issue. We need to make sure that the reading component in the bill doesn't incentivize through a $500 per student funding piece, make sure that it actually incentivizes good outcomes in reading. We need to work on the charter school part so that we can ensure that Anybody that wants to attend a charter school can do that. So there's a couple things we have to work on. And what I said over the last 30 minutes is, we've got half the job done. But if it's just going to be about money and nothing else, I'm not interested in having this bill become law. So that would cause a veto, I should say. That I would veto the bill. So I think we don't have to be there if the legislature wants to work on some of these things. I think we get both things across the finish line. But if for some reason we don't, then that'll be it for reform in Alaska, I think, for years, to be honest with you.
All right, next we have Steve Kirch with Alaska's News Source.
Yeah, hi. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, hi. Governor, thank you for your time today. So my question is, and I've heard some differing opinions here at the Capitol over the last couple of days, and one of them was, like, if action wasn't taken on this bill today, it would put the internet funding provision in the bill in jeopardy. I was wondering if you could just answer that question.
Yeah, no, we checked on
what's the timeline for the internet funding.
Yeah, we checked on that. We've heard about these timelines. But it's our understanding from good sources that there's plenty of time to do this bill and not miss those deadlines. Some of those deadlines go into March, mid-March, actually. So there's plenty of time to do that.
All right, next question from Carter DeJong with the Fairbanks Daily News Miner. Carter, if you're with us, go ahead and ask your question. Okay, we'll move on to Sean McGuire with the ADN.
Hi, Governor. My question is about how the state could afford the package that passed and then the teacher bonuses you're proposing. My understanding is that the budget's already getting pretty strained. There isn't much headroom with oil over $70 a barrel. What's this going to mean for other budget priorities? What's it going to mean for the dividend this year if both packages pass this year?
Yeah. So again, Sean, what we're talking about is policy, and the policy that we're talking about does have dollar amounts attached to it. But if you recall, there was a court case that basically said if you don't have the money to pay for some of these things, it may be difficult. We have to see what the spring forecast is here shortly. We have to see what the amount of money is we have to play with to be able to put together a budget. I've said this before, everything that people would like to have put in the budget is probably not going to get funded. And some of that may include some of these pieces. Not, trust me, there's going to be a BSA. There's going to be a substantial BSA. There just is. But we need to talk about our revenue, our resources to put behind these things, and we can do that as well over the next 14 days, the next month, the next 2 months. That discussion is going to happen anyway, regardless of what the policy is. That discussion will happen. But at least if we get the policy on the books, at least we have something to budget for in the future. So I would say that if everything that everyone asks for is put on the table, certainly our revenue comes up short this year. There's no doubt about it. But I think we can have discussions as to what the priorities will be and what will get funded.
Our next one, Claire Strimple with the Alaska Beacon.
Thanks. Governor, you're in Anchorage right now. Will you be coming down to Juneau to ask lawmakers to change their votes on education?
I'll be down there next week.
All right, next we'll go to Mark Sabatini with the Juneau Empire.
What's the week after?
Thank you. Governor, you talked a lot about using these retention bonuses to keep teachers. However, here in the district, basically the equation is if we have a shortfall, what's going to happen is a bunch of layoffs are going to occur. And if this BSA doesn't go through or there's a reduced version of it, you're going to see layoffs and there aren't going to be teachers to pay bonuses to. So I guess I would ask, what is your response to the argument that we need the BSA to have teachers here in the first place so they can get these bonuses you want?
I think I've said at least 4 times, Mark, in the last 40 minutes that there needs to be money in the BSA. A. B, I don't think, Mark, they're going to lay off every one of their teachers. You wouldn't have a school then. So there'll still be teachers there that you want to keep. I can't speak to the inner workings of Juneau's budgeting problems. I know that our Department of Education is working with them through this. But again, this will be the 5th time. There's got to be money in the BSA. There's got to be an increase in the BSA. That's the 5th time I've said that.
All right, next we'll go to Ashley.
Do you want to be more specific on what you consider to be a specific amount? When you say significant?
No, I don't have a specific amount, Mark. And to be honest, most people don't either. There's a 680 in there right now. And the question, like we talked about, is when we look at the budget at the end of this year, how much of that 680, maybe all of it, does the legislature want to fund? So the other problem that we really haven't talked about in this press conference is overhead, is accounting practices. That's a whole nother discussion. That's a whole nother discussion. There are school districts in the state that don't have any accounting problems. There are school districts in the state that when they're given one-time money like we were with COVID, they made sure they didn't put it into reoccurring costs so that people could then say, oh, we don't have enough money now. We got to go get more money. We understand that schools need to be funded. We understand that there needs to be money in the BSA. We understand this. We also understand that we're not going to get much better in performance unless we emphasize performance. Yes, the money is the other side of the coin. Yes, Mark. Yes.
Going next to Ashlyn O'Hara with the Peninsula Clarion.
Hi, Governor. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more. When you look at this package as one that was backed by 56 state lawmakers, on both sides of the aisle, representing nearly every region of the state. Does that send any type of message to you? Do you feel any obligation to honor the wishes of what the combined chambers are telling you and what their constituents are telling you?
I feel that we're also honoring the wishes of many parents and many students who don't walk the halls of Juneau. I think we're honoring the voices of many Alaskans who are busy working at their jobs, paying taxes, raising their kids, can't fly to Juneau, can't hang out in Juneau. I think there needs to be a voice as well for those people who elected those legislators, but also elected a governor to make sure that their wishes are also taken into account. Many of those legislators that voted for this package are not in disagreement that there needs to be more in terms of policy. As a matter of fact, I anticipate phone calls after this press conference in which legislators are going to say, hey, great press conference, let's get to work, let's get some of these things going. So it's not an either or. There's an opportunity right now to finish off what they started. Many of those same legislators had some of these things in there. But for the purpose of getting something across the finish line that they felt was better than nothing, I get that. But I also know that many of those same legislators want to complete this process. So honoring the legislators, I honor the legislators by thanking them for making this a priority. And I think we all honor the people of Alaska, including our students and our parents, that we continue the process of making our school system better.
We're going to go back now to James Brooks with the Alaska Beacon. Am I coming through all right now?
Yep.
Okay. Governor, I want to follow up on Claire's question, because it seems like this is a pretty important thing for you, this teacher bonuses. And so I wanted to ask, it seems important, but you're not going to be here to talk to legislators and ask them to change their minds on this?
James, I'm in constant contact with legislators. I was talking to legislators today. I was talking with them last night. I'm in constant contact with legislators. This is important, and I will make the time to be in communication with legislators. It's a difficult situation. I'm not the 61st legislator. I do have state business. The executive their main purpose is to run the state. So, no, I plan on working with them. I've got people down there working with them. I'm on the phone working with them. I'll see them in person shortly. I'll be working with them. I don't think that should be a impediment. It could be an excuse. It could be an excuse for people not to want to do the work. We can't do the work unless the governor's right in front of us and we know he's there sitting in the chair, as opposed to talking to us constantly, whether it's by phone or in person. But no, I don't think it's an impediment. I think it's, look at, a couple years ago, you can look at a number of bills that the legislature's passed over the past 5-10 years. Some of those bills were passed in 2 or 3 days. If there's a will, there's a way. That's the bottom line. And if there's not a will, then we can come up with a litany of excuses why we're not going to do something. And if that's the case, if there'll be a litany of the excuses why we're not doing something, then there should be no surprise that they didn't want to complete the work.
Our last question is going to be back here in the room from Iris Samuels, the ADN.
Thank you. I have a question.
What about me?
Go ahead and we'll back it down.
All right. I have a question about the timeline here. There's one issue, element of the bill related to internet speeds for schools, and that has a deadline that's coming up.
We just talked about that. I don't mean to interrupt you, but we just talked about that. That deadline of in 3 days is not actually true. That the information we got from authority source says there's more time. There's actually a few weeks.
All right, so let me switch then to a completely different question. Last time you had a press conference, you talked about these teacher bonuses, which we talked about today, is a very important recruitment tool. And you also said last press conference that you had heard from teachers, younger teachers, that they're more interested potentially in these bonuses than they would be in a pension. I just wanted to ask you if you want to return to those comments, if you still think that pension isn't an element of teacher recruitment and retention, just given the fact that in the recruitment and retention task force that was convened by your administration, pensions were something that came up, that were brought up by teachers as an important tool for them to stay in Alaska.
So wait, before so Iris, just clarify one more time. Just give me a shorter version of the question.
Yeah. How do you think the bonuses compare to pensions and return to defined benefits in terms of their efficacy in recruiting and retaining teachers in Alaska?
From what I understand, for example, you get a teacher that's a year or two out of college and they have student loans and they're trying to buy a car. The feedback I'm getting is that helps them pay off their student loans. That helps them purchase a car. That helps them pay down their credit card bills. And so the teacher bonus retention, the retention recruitment concept, we will do a research piece with it to make sure that what we think is going to work, in fact, does work. And those discussions as to what other things that teachers believe they need or could be used to keep them in Alaska will also be discussed. Housing was an issue, will continue to be an issue. We started working on that years ago for teachers. We will go back to that research piece and we'll go through that and we'll try and make this environment in Alaska the best environment for teachers because it's a very competitive world. But this year, I think the teacher bonus concept is going to be a lot easier to get across the finish line, to be honest with you, than the various competing retirement bills that we see.
All right, now last question from Jeff Landfield of the Alaska Landmine.
Hey, Governor, I see you got that flick back there again. I like that. I had a question about the deal that was kind of, there was one point there was a deal last week that was kind of going to get some of your stuff and between the minority and the majority in the House, and that kind of fell apart, and then the Senate stepped in and there was a different deal. And I guess I'm wondering why you feel the House majority Republicans kind of cut your priorities out, and then also is this kind of waiting for 2 weeks until the bill has to be acted on? Is that about putting pressure on some of the vulnerable Republicans who, kind of were part of this voting for the deal that cut your priorities out?
No, it's stating the obvious. The obvious is the bill was incomplete. We still have time to fix it. Why not fix it? And with regard to the legislators, as I mentioned, I think there was a number of legislators that thought this was the best they were going to get. I didn't think so. I believe it could be better. And so, again, we all work together to make it better, and then we get a much better bill for the people of Alaska. A spending bill is not going to make it past the veto pen. Just the spending bill. It's not going to happen. Well, I mean, I think I've said just about everything I can say. Actually, to be honest with you, I think the ADN editorial board said just about everything there is that could be said. I don't think there's anyone that argues with the idea that we want to keep our teachers. If putting money into the BSA is going to retain and recruit our teachers, that's great. But it would have happened last year, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Alaska is, we're not plopped in the middle of Iowa, okay? We've got infrastructure issues up here. We've got distance issues, cost of living issues. Sometimes our climate isn't something that some people feel is conducive. We have some headwinds against us. We have a lot more going for us. But if we intend to compete with the rest of this country, then we have to enhance our performance, and we have to keep our teachers. If I'm missing the mark, if somehow I got the wrong memo and we don't want to compete, and all we want to do is use schools as a way to funnel money to, so that local economies have folks spending money, or that the schools are nothing more than babysitting centers for some. I go back to what I said in the last press conference. And you only really know this unless, unless you thought about being a teacher when you were 16, 17, 18, 19, you're in college. You wanted to become a teacher to help kids. And that has stuck with me ever since I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to help kids. I want to help people. I ran for the school board. I ran for the Senate. And I ran for governor because I want to help people. And it's got to start with our kids. Whenever the BSA mantra happens, it's all about the kids, think about the kids. Well, we got 14 days to really think about the kids and enhancing our charter schools. I want to thank the legislature for the homeschool portion. We can better the reading component that was in there. And we could do something to really change the game on whether we can keep teachers or not. And yeah, a budget is oftentimes referred to as a set of values. And I think the values laid out show that we value our teachers and value our kids. And if in the end, the discussions over the next several days result in some good things for kids and teachers and the system, that'll be fantastic. If it doesn't, there's still going to be money put in the schools because we've got to turn on the lights and so forth. But I think if there's not a discussion about performance over the next 14 days, then that's a message from from some of our legislators, from NEA that purports to be a champion of children, that they're really not a priority. Because if a budget is about priorities, we'll put the policies in place, and then we'll work on the budget. So I'm looking forward to talking with the legislature. I'm looking forward to working with the legislature. I think we got a couple pieces here that we could put together, get it across the finish line, and then absolutely be able to say that this was really a pretty good year for education in the state of Alaska, and to get on to the other issues that we need to fix this year for the people of Alaska. But with that, I want to thank you. We'll probably have a press conference here in the next 2 weeks at the latest, maybe a week and a half. You guys will be appraised of progress, and hopefully we get this across the finish line. And so look forward to working with the legislature, and look forward to doing good things for Alaska. So thanks, folks.
And there you have it. That was Governor Mike Dunleavy at the end of his more than hour-long press conference. He said that the education bill that was passed 2 days ago, it had some good things in it, but it was not enough. It missed the mark. And he has said that he wants to work with the legislature over the next 14 days so that they can fix the bill. He said if it's not fixed, if it is just about money, he is going to veto that bill. But he wants a reading component re-emphasized there, and that means that they would encourage, or they would reward, incentivize success. And also he wants an element of teacher retention, and he wants an element about charter schools. Those were the 3 items that he mentioned that if they weren't included, they were likely going to see a veto on the education bill. Our reporter, of course, Steve Kirch, is in Juneau covering this story. He will be here tonight at 5, 6, and 10 to discuss what has happened today. Also, the governor mentioned the impediment legislation. That's how he started the press conference, if you weren't there at the very beginning. And this is basically dealing with how people impede access to public spaces. In particular, he talked about protests, things that we've seen in the lower 48. He says we're not seeing it in Alaska, but that this is sort of to prevent that, and that there would be financial punishments, basically, liabilities, if someone was injured or a death was caused or there was a financial setback due to somebody impeding access to a public area. Specifically, he said, like highways, where you're seeing people glue themselves to highways in the lower 48. So those were the 2 things that he discussed. Again, we will hear more tonight at 4, 5, 6, and 10 on Alaska's News Source. Have yourself a great day. Thank you for joining us.